I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you are listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of the Hitech Podcast. This is your host, William Illingworth, joined by my fellow host, Joshua Swartz. Not Will, who I almost introduced you as in one of our attempts.
Yeah, this isn't the first attempt at this episode. You're listening to the Hitech Podcast, we practice before we start talking to you guys because we care about your quality podcast experience, and Will announced me as him.
In a test.
It's a confusing thing. One person has a beard, the other doesn't. One person looks completely different than the other person. It's confusing sometimes.
I'm pretty sure, like, if I asked my therapist about this or something, he'd probably say something about my ego. I probably love myself so much that I love
yourself so much you want everybody else to be Will.
Want more of me.
Is that what this is? Sorry, I'm now imagining like you having a really weird dream. It's just like everybody slowly morphing into you.
Agent
like you're
Smith
surrounded by
from
other
the Matrix.
worlds. Yeah, it's like a weird Matrix. Anyway, this is a Hitech Podcast where we don't talk about the Matrix a lot. I can't guarantee we won't. We probably will at some point, but it's fine. This is not the early 2000s. We're not doing a series related around the Matrix, like everybody did. Anyway, it's a thing if you're our age.
Yeah,
anyway, this episode 1. Not 39. There we go. I was in the wrong episode page for a hot second. I almost said the wrong number. It is episode 139 of the Hitech Podcast, and we got an old friend joining the podcast. One could say she is almost like another host at certain times. She's been on the podcast enough.
We should check guest credits to see who's been on more, her or Justin.
That's a good point.
Frankly.
Yeah, we should double check that. Anyway, the great Robin Jeffers of the R.J. Jeffers series on taxonomies is joining us again this week on episode 139. And we had Robin on last time for Ted Lasso, right? She was on for the Ted Lasso series. Yep. Ted Lasso
at the end of season 5.
We got talking and somehow got talking about a topic she's been looking into a bit, and which is culturally responsive teaching, and it was a cool topic. Will and I were enjoying the conversation a little bit. We were like, we should have an episode about that, and
why not?
That's what this is. Robin is joining us for an episode to talk about culturally responsive teaching this week, and it's gonna be a good time. This is one of those intros we've done where we actually haven't done the interview ahead of time, so I have no idea.
We're not sure. I'm actually waiting for her to teach us, because I kind of get the idea of CRT. This CRT, there's another CRT.
Yeah, there's a different CRT. That's a whole other thing.
Not great. But I'm new here. I'm excited for Robin just to teach us and share the idea. I suspect it's going to be associated with socio-emotional learning, right? It's going to be something where we're trying to be aware of our students, aware of their backgrounds and how. But hey, let's get into the interview then and just find out from Robin herself. What do you say?
I don't like that idea. Let's continue. No, I'm just joking. That's a great idea. Let's jump in with Robin talking about culturally responsive teaching.
And that's a wrap. Wait a second. We've been actually pretty busy on getting this episode to actually happen this evening. There's been quite a bit going into this interview. So now that we are here, we're ready to start with our good friend of the podcast, Robin S. Jeffers. How are you doing this evening, Robin?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Thank you
for coming back. Emphasize the S. Because I messed that up in the intro. It was fine. When you re-listen to this episode, Robin, and you hear the intro, I may have said Robin J. Jeffers. But I think that's because there's a restaurant that's like J. Jeffries near us. So every time I think of your name, I screw it up. There we go. Anyway, I was admitting that to you now.
Okay. Yeah. I kept the S on purpose because the S is actually for my maiden name. It's not actually my given middle name. So
Did you replace your middle name, or do you have like two
yeah,
middle names with your maiden?
no,
Ooh.
my maiden name just became my middle name.
What was
My
the
wife did
original
that as
middle
well.
name? Now I need to know facts. What's the original Robin
Nope.
middle name?
Nope.
Oh, this
Oh,
might have to be
hold
off
on.
air.
Oh man.
Nope.
Wow.
Don't worry,
All
we'll
right.
put it in
Well,
the show notes. No, never mind. We will start a Hitech Podcast poll. What do you think
Yeah, hey,
Robin's middle name is?
here we
sure,
go.
do that.
Be like a little social campaign. Good job,
Yeah, that'll be
Josh. I
great.
like
We'll
that.
see how close we get. I like it. Anyway.
Robin is clearly more of a friend of the podcast. You know us. You work with Josh every day. My condolences. No, actually, I think that'd be an awesome thing.
It is an
Joking.
awesome
I
thing.
do work with Josh every day. So what am I
Yeah, I was
talking
gonna say
about?
you do too.
Yeah, right. But where was I going with that? Most folks that we bring on the podcast in any sort of interview capacity, we got to go through all the rigmarole. You know what's going on, and you brought this topic to us. So we don't even have questions prepped. We don't have anything ready to go. We are ready to learn what culturally relevant teaching
Oh,
is.
look at you.
Just gonna lean into the jokes,
Um,
folks.
Yeah, lean into it. It's
Lean
great.
into the jokes.
Yes, culturally
No.
responsive teaching. The other
Yeah,
CRT.
talk to us about that. We've probably gonna get a basic understanding from just the terms, right? Culturally responsive teaching. So I'm thinking, don't be insensitive, but there's got to be a little bit more to it than that. So what's your background with CRT in the academic sense?
Okay, so my master's is in teaching English as a second language. So I had a lot of courses going through grad school about being culturally responsive and appreciating all kinds of cultures. And then not only that, but then taking that into the classroom and lesson planning and everything. And originated by Gloria Ladson Billings and others, culturally responsive teaching is more of a mindset rather than like a set of strategies or like a toolbox. There's no real right way to do it. There's a lot of right ways to do it. There's a few wrong ways to do it, but it's really it's really just kind of when teachers take the perspective of openness to a student's culture and possibly different from their own, and integrate that into their lesson planning and their materials planning and all of that, really so that the students can flourish and grow in the best way that they can, knowing that not everyone is from the same background. And so I just think that's really cool and interesting, and I love the concept and I love the ideas. And actually, most of what I had thought about to talk about tonight was not necessarily Ladson Billings, but Zaretta Hammond went into like the brain science of culturally responsive teaching, and I love that. I think brain science is so fascinating. I'm such a nerd, I know, but I just think it's so cool. So yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna have to work on spelling that one because I've never even heard of Dr. Z. I'm assuming it was a Z.
Yeah, Zaretta, Zaretta Hammond.
Got it. Thank you. That'll help with the little show notes as we go. But stepping back before we jump into the cognitive science, because I'm with you. Let's go. When you said about the teaching English as a second language thing, that like clicked for me. I was like, oh, right. That makes sense of why you are familiar with it, and it was coming out of your master's. My bachelor's is in that, and a lot of my courses on my bachelor's around teaching English were like second language acquisition, right? But then the culturally significant things to acquiring a language. And then we talk about in other courses like how not to be imperialists, how not to be imperialistic with English, that we come in and we take over your language or we eradicate the other language. Like, oh yeah, like I'm thinking of those lessons coming right back to me where that's a big thing. I'm now wondering if there's as much of that in traditional L-Ed or things like that, where the teachers are being taught to go into kindergartens, into local areas, into middle schools. Like, is that as big a deal? I think it should be, because culture is not just about ethnicity or just about geographical region, right? But I don't know. Can you speak to that from your background as well? Like, do you think that that's a part of the teacher education programs today, or is that not as much because we had the English as a second language background?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do know that at our institution it is because I got to teach it. So I got to teach. So I had it was early. We have early levels, so like pre-K to 4, mid levels, so 5 to 8. We don't have secondary yet, but I'm hopeful that someday we might. We have HPE, so health and phys ed, and then we have music ed. So all of those students have to take at least an introductory course in teaching ESL. And so I took that at every opportunity to integrate the
That's awesome.
culturally responsive teaching idea into that. So one of the first things we have to understand about it is the levels of culture. And I think you're kind of, what you were just saying, you're kind of reminded me of it. So there's like the surface level where that's like things that you can see, like clothing and holidays and food, music and dance, like all the fun things that, you know, tie people together easily. So that's like the surface culture. And we absolutely can start there and we should start there, but we shouldn't end there because there's shallow culture. And that would have anything to do with societal norms for different cultures in different areas, how people respect or disrespect each other, a lot of
So
nonverbal cues.
shallow culture is not just about Taylor Swift. It's like
Correct.
other things, right?
Correct.
Just had to go. I mean, it was just an easy, throw it on the. This is how the podcast gets famous. Little guy makes joke about Taylor Swift right now. I'm
She's like, wait, hold on. An Hitech Podcast talked about me? Never mind. We're gonna ignore everything else going on, and we're gonna take that podcast down.
This was the last.
She just won her 4th
episode.
Grammy for Album of the Year. Like, she's a rock star. I love her. But
it was her 13th Grammy, right?
Her
like it was her 4th
Grammy,
Album of the Year, but it was 13th
yes.
total.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Correct. Anyway, shallow culture, a more important thing.
Sorry.
Shallow culture is getting into more of the emotionally charged factor of people's interactions. Okay. So like you've got the surface culture being the food and the dress and everything. That's like very visible and it's really easy to connect. And who doesn't like to share a meal together, right? Like, you know, over something. But then, so the shallow culture gets a little bit more emotionally charged. So like you could look at somebody weird and they might get offended, you know, like if they don't understand, or the student who is taught in their culture not to make eye contact with someone older than them. And a teacher, you know, demanding eye contact, look at me, like that could be an awkward situation. That would be shallow culture. But then there's deep culture, where if you really get into learning with the students and really fellowshipping with them, then you get into like worldview, like ethics, spiritual beliefs, health beliefs, like how they like do self-care and mental health and things like that. So we don't always get there with students. In fact, I would venture to say we rarely get there with students, unless we really make an intention to do so. But I think we usually get to surface culture. Like I know when I taught kindergarten, it was, you know, well, February. I don't know. Is this going to be released in February or is this still March? Who knows?
March, February. Yeah.
Listeners, we just passed February.
Other people call it the new February. You know, it's the
like new.
Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
February was always one of my favorite months to teach kindergarten because there were so many things to celebrate. You know, we've got, you know, important things like Black History Month and President's Day and things like that. But you've also got the 100th day of school and Valentine's Day and Dental Health Month, you know, and Lunar New Year. Oh, I love that one. Yeah. So there were a lot of important things to celebrate in February, but that's all surface culture. Like that's, you know, how we connect with students on a like face value, like immediately. But like I said, we can start there for sure because it's an easy place to start. It's a comfortable place to start, but we should venture in our teaching and in our lesson planning and materials planning to go a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah.
Would
So
you say?
I'm curious. I'm jumping in. No, go ahead. I'll jump in. Okay. So this part will get in and out or continue. Who knows? The I was curious, like, so, and I'm remembering as you're talking about this, Robin, didn't we do a book study together on this
We
at
did.
our institution?
Yes.
We did. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's
I have
fun.
the book right here.
Yeah.
Teaching Across Cultural
I read that
Strengths.
book in case you were curious.
You did.
I kind of
know.
forgot I did. Now I'm remembering
Really
conversation.
memorable.
Yeah, it was a little while ago. It was the whole thing. The question I'm curious about, like, and I think Will has a question too about kind of how the difference between those two areas. But like, I'm curious for those listening, like, just on a overview kind of explanation beyond like the holiday stuff. What for you, or what you've seen in your teaching students? What does this look? How does this change the way you lesson plan? I think that's a lot of people, even when we were doing the book study, I think a lot of people's question that started to come up is like, okay, this is interesting, but how does this impact how I change the way I plan to teach or what I teach, per se? Because I know different topics, people, like, obviously people in history were like, okay, I can see how I might tweak what I do in history or things like that. But as Will always talks about, the scuba diving professor might be like, how do I culturally teach scuba diving culturally responsive?
Yes. So there's lots of ways. So there's no, one right way, but so some ways, and you would remember this from that Teaching Across Cultural Strengths book. And by the way, it was a while ago, and it was a very tough read. Like, it was a heavy book.
There's a lot of stuff in it.
So it was very dense. But one thing though that did stand out in that book, it went through a framework. What was it called? Cultural Frameworks in Teaching and Learning, the individuated and integrated model. So there are cultures such as the US and the UK that we would refer to as individualistic or individuated, meaning that students are, responsible for their own things. There's, there might be group work, but it's generally one person for themselves. Like, you are earning the grade, you are doing the work, and you can basically depend on yourself to do so. And then there's integrated, or what we might call collectivist cultures, where their learning, like the core of their learning, is done together in community. So as a teacher, if you're lesson planning, like you mentioned, you might, analyze the different backgrounds of students in your class, and you're really not going to know those backgrounds, FYI, unless you ask or unless you really investigate, because we shouldn't even assume things just because somebody is from somewhere. So you're going to have those conversations first. So bottom line is knowing your students for sure. But then when you're lesson planning, like, tailor some assignments or some projects toward either individual means or like communal learning. So if you have a lot of students, from one of those collectivist cultures, Latin America, Asian cultures, a lot of them are very communal. Then you can tailor your assignments that way. Another really important one, though, is representation. And I try to do this in all of my courses that I teach at our institution, whenever I can, to have voices of color, or, different genders, or different ages, or, just different perspectives. So Josh and I work at a very conservative institution, conservatively minded, and I like to stir up the waters whenever I can. So
Yes.
I am constantly playing devil's advocate with my students. One of my favorites right now is teaching children's lit, and I've got voices from all different backgrounds in like my course materials. So even as a teacher, when you're planning materials to put in front of your students, part of being culturally responsive would be to, put those perspectives in front of them. And I think it's really important that we do that. Even if we don't have members of other cultures, everybody has their own distinct culture. for real.
Well, and one of those small ways that I've been doing that, like there's probably the last 5 years I've been very sensitive to that. The smallest way you can apply that technique to your curriculum is use different names when you write narrative, right? Instead of
Mhm.
all of your examples being like John and Susie went to talk to blah 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 blah, right? Like
Mhm.
there are billions of names, and if you can't take a moment to just Google some different names, like Josh and I did some things recently with some character work, and I was like, I'm not gonna accept my prejudice and my bias towards names. I went to ChatGPT, which
Yeah,
has
yeah,
its
I know.
own problems, I'll admit, but I gave it some prompting to tell it, like, I want classic names, and it's okay if it's using statistics, but like I want classic names out of this region. I told it, give me a French Canadian name for
Nice.
someone who might be this, give me a blah blah blah, so that
Yeah.
it could now at least I wasn't the one going, I think Jean sounds good, which is just my American brain going, what's the closest thing to John?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
taking
That's
that
why I
out
name
of it.
all my characters Josh. I view it
Just
as
name
not being, yeah. It's just, let's just play the game.
So
No, you're right.
So when Josh walked down the street with Josh, they were talking
Yeah.
about blah 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 blah. blah.
Gosh,
Yeah,
yeah, no,
they
that's a
were
good
talking
point. Like
about
they,
Josh.
yeah, exactly. It's the character changes and like the representation you have, or even like the examples I think of like holidays or things that you use. It doesn't have to just be about what holidays you celebrate, but like in your scenarios, like as a teacher, we've all had to come up with some kind of scenario or something students are dealing with. Like I think there's ways we can choose those carefully and do our work to not just have the
Mhm.
same voice and picture shared, but look at things differently for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah, and I mean, even with going along with names, like the visuals that you're putting in front of your students, if you have your own classroom, like I'm thinking like a K-12 homeroom teacher, you could have welcome in all kinds of different languages. Whether or not
Right.
you have speakers of those languages in your class, it still kind of broadens horizons for anyone.
Yeah.
You could, you don't know when you're going to get a student who doesn't speak English in your class. And if you have some kind of representation from their language, it means the world. Even like learning their actual names. Like
Oh
we often
my.
change names, or if they're hard to pronounce, we decide, oh well, that's too hard, I'm going to call you a not name. I don't know, your first letter of your name or something like that. Like, but learning that about students and even being able to share like one word in their language
Yep.
can mean the world to students.
Yep.
For
Yeah,
sure.
when I taught English in Beijing, the university required the students to take English names, and
Mm.
I think I can say whatever I want about this. This is like way beyond the statute of limitations. I don't work for anybody involved with any of that stuff anymore. I hated it. I was just
Yeah.
like, are you kidding me? Like, this is very Chinese in this one sense, right? Like it's dictatorial. They were being told what they had to do, and they had a certain way they had to act in the program. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is crazy, because I mean, there's one thing to be said for trying to give them the best chance they have at doing business in the global economy. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
There's another thing to whitewash their identity. And that's what it
Mm-hmm.
really felt like. So I gave all of the students the opportunity on their little name cards, write whatever you want,
Mm-hmm.
but both. Like if you want to use an English name, don't write it. Write your name for me to be able to read it, right, in English letters, or the English alphabet, so I can read it. But I will use your Chinese name if that's what you want me to use. And I even hate saying it that way, right? Because it's not a Chinese name and an American name. It's their
Right.
name and
Right.
a nickname, right? So it's really hard when you come up against that in the real world, but it is a problem. And I love this CRT for the fact that it is trying to support the learners where they are and lift them up and give them dignity, sovereignty in their self and in their identity.
Yeah, this is like, so it's not strategies, it's not a toolbox, it's just a mindset of respect, and in that way it's very adaptive. to all different situations. It's really about the quality of the relationship between the teacher and the student, which is just as important as what they're learning, if not more so. So it's really a mindset and an approach to what you're doing. So, but yeah, no, it's really interesting. In this book by Zaretta Hammond, she goes into the brain science of it. So she says, obviously, we use our brains to make sense of the world around us, and
some of us.
There
are exceptions.
It depends on the
we
day.
are supposed
It's the
to
amount
use
of
our
coffee
brains.
I have that changes what happens there. Yeah.
But our cultural frame of reference helps us do that. I mean, and our brains grow when we are able to make sense of our surroundings and when we're able to understand things and make connections. But I mean, do we want to talk about the levels of the brain?
Yeah,
because it's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hold on. Let me get my brain example here. I'm just joking. I have a bottle. I'm prepared for Robin. I'll break it apart. It'll be
instead of Jack Sparrow with a jar of dirt, you've got a jar of brain. Is that what you've got?
Yeah.
I
only accept this if you do the song. Yeah, it's fine.
I'll get a jar of dirt. I've got a jar of dirt. I'd cue
My
this up
daughter
by
actually
saying,
has a shirt that says that.
The jar of dirt. Does it have a jar on it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, because okay, side note before we get into brain science.
Please.
My family and I went down to Ocracoke Island. Well, actually, this is relevant. Okay, so in one of my linguistics classes in grad school, we learned about Ocracoke Island. It's the very southern tip of the Outer Banks. So it's in North Carolina. Okay. And you have to take a ferry to get there. And it's such a small island that you can park your car and they have golf carts to rent and you can drive around on a golf cart. So it's a really tiny island. It's got a cool lighthouse. It's got a lot of great restaurants. I recommend going there. Really cute bookstore. People are all super friendly. And who doesn't love just driving around in golf carts around an island? So they had... all that to say, they have a pirate festival every year because this is where Blackbeard was killed. And so they have this pirate festival. So we went down. We wanted to go down like 2021-ish, but then they had a hurricane. I forget the year. It was around there. They had a hurricane, so we couldn't. Maybe it was 2019. Anyway, maybe it was before COVID. That whole time is a blur. But anyway, we didn't get to go because they had a hurricane, but we did get to go then a few years later. And of course, I, being the mom that I am, I made my whole family wear pirate shirts. So my daughter says, I have a jar of dirt. Get a jar of dirt.
I love
Mine says, I might be the reason why the rum is gone.
Darn.
Yeah.
If you go for a copy of that shirt.
So how did this connect back to brain science? I
felt
it's culture, though, isn't it? Culture?
It's culture. Yeah. In my linguistics, So in my linguistics class, we learned that Ocracoke Island has its own Creole language, and I was so fascinated because I wanted to go there and hear it. Nobody really speaks it anymore, except for maybe like the really old people on the island, which is super unfortunate and disappointing. But if you Google, you could Google it. If you YouTube like Ocracoke dialect, you'd find some examples of it. It's fascinating. I love dialects and language.
Yeah, I love this too, and I'm literally Googling Blackbeard to like see this little last battle info on Ocracoke Island.
Oh yeah, he was beheaded. They do a whole reenactment and everything. It's
do they behead a person? That feels like
it's an actor. They do a beheading, but it's an actor.
Actors aren't people. That's fine.
Stunt things.
I think they pretend to be beheaded, Will. They don't actually behead the actor.
Yeah, they pretend that.
Are you an actor? Come on. Time for your beheading. Welcome to Ocracoke Island.
And
they hold up a fake head too. Once they do it,
Yeah.
they hold up the fake head. Yeah, it's
You know what
So
is
we went
also in the
from
head?
shallow.
Yeah, you know what
Really-
is also in the head? Brains. So
no,
brains.
there are no brains in the head. Anyway, back to brain science. Okay. At the brain's most basic level, you have what's called the lizard brain, the reptilian region. And
Okay.
this part is
Yeah.
only reactive. It's like your fight or flight. It's the thing that keeps you alert and attentive and safe.
It keeps me sending
so-
bad emails.
Yes, possibly. So this part of the brain wants to keep us in our comfort zones, in like a safe zone. But it's also the part of the brain that searches for novelty and important changes in environment. So as a teacher, if you introduce novelty a lot in your classroom, in materials, in teaching styles, in activity assignments, in anything, the student's brain is literally going to recognize the change in activity and be more attentive. So that's where the brain science comes in for that part in teaching. So because something is new, they're automatically paying more attention than they would normally. Makes sense. Which is a lot of the times why we have like an activating strategy at the beginning of a lesson or something to set up the lesson. Of course, you want it aligned and congruent with what you're going to be teaching in the next,
So
minutes
you
or
don't
hour.
do the Blackbeard reenactment if you need to do polynomials.
Correct. Yes.
Or
Okay.
you
may-
do, and that is possibly the best class that's ever happened.
Sorry,
I'm sure you could tie it in somehow. And then you have the limbic region of the brain, which is only present in mammals. And this is responsible for the emotional connection to whatever is happening. So like if it's learning, then it's the emotional connection to a lesson or a reading or, something like that. Some kids have, really unsafe, scared tendencies when it comes to school, and that's not what we want. So we want to first make the brain know that learning is safe in our classrooms, and hopefully we've built community and showed the students that this is a safe place for taking risks and making mistakes and things like that. But then you get to the limbic region and the actual learning, and this is where your emotional connection is linked to behavior and cognition, and this is where you create the background knowledge, or schema is what we called it in ESL. So you've got the emotional connection. So first safety, then the emotional connection. Within that is also communication and fear and memory. So things like that are part of the limbic brain then also. And then the neocortex is probably the most intricate and complicated, which is all the more fascinating because it's got an infinite capacity to learn and rework things. So this book by Zaretta Hammond, she says the infant brain, so like a baby, is capable of learning over 3,000 languages, like just as a brain sitting there in the baby is capable of learning 3,000 languages, but it can't speak any of them, originally. And when it begins to hear and process its native language, then all of the other possibilities kind of die off or get
reduced.
cut. Yeah, because it wants to strengthen that one that it has the emotional connection to. So all the other nerves get pruned because they're unnecessary. Now they can come back. Like if somebody wants to learn a second language, I'm not saying they can't come back. But like the neuroplasticity of the brain, meaning creating like the gray matter, has an unlimited amount of capability to learn, which is amazing. It's the only time we want wrinkles. I think in grad school, I heard for the first time that like the more wrinkles in your brain, the smarter you are. So that's why like when you look at a diagram or or ooh, heaven forbid, an actual brain, it's all like wrinkly and like folding over on itself because it's actually learning. Well, it was learning more with all those wrinkles. So I don't know. I just think that's super fascinating.
Well, and when you think about what you and I have studied in the context of like ESL and language acquisition, right? When you think of polyglots, someone who can speak more than I think it's more than 3 languages if you're a polyglot, or is it 3 and
But
3?
yeah,
Like if you're
well, it would be
2 is
by some.
bilingual,
Yeah, 2, yeah,
and then 3 up is poly. Um,
or 4.
they
Is there a
these are the
there's
people.
trilingual?
I'm here we go.
Doesn't matter.
They speak a lot of languages. Yeah, they're a superhero. That's what they're called.
Yes, I would say 4 or more would be that.
These folks end up having that kind of neuroplasticity to process so much more information in a sense because and it becomes easier for them to learn new languages because they're flexing that muscle all the time.
Yeah.
They're so capable of retaining content, changing that information, twisting it. It's the cross connections, right, of this information to that information that creates those neuro. Now the language is slipping me, so I need to learn another language so I can get more information in my brain. But the connections across points of information that help you retain that over time, that makes sense when people have those many languages. But it's also like when you say I could have learned 3,000 languages, and then every second I breathed longer than that moment, I got dumber and dumber. That's what I've heard.
Wow.
That's literally what
That's a little bit more
They
depressing than
just
what I was
got the
going for.
depressing side of the human history.
Oh yes,
with
but
laughter
no,
tonight.
what you were talking about with learning languages and learning multiple languages, it's very true. I mean, and I love languages, but I can only speak English fluently. Like I know pieces of lots of languages, but only pieces. I am on a 700 plus day streak in Duolingo, and I can barely put a sentence together. I mean, I can put some sentences together. I can
What
read
language?
Swahili.
Oh,
Yeah. So my husband grew up in Africa, in Tanzania, and they speak Swahili in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya, and East Africa. So we're going there in 2025. So I really want to learn it. But and this ties into so much easier to learn a language when you're immersed in that language. So like we went over for a few weeks when we were first married, our first year anniversary we spent in Tanzania with his parents who were still there at that point. And so we were only there for 2 or 3 weeks, and there was a conversation going on, and he turned to in Swahili, and he turned to translate to me, and I was like, it's okay. He said something funny. She laughed. It was great. And like, I summarized the conversation, not word for word, obviously, because I couldn't.
right.
He's like, wow, how did you get that from only being here for a few weeks? And it was because if you're immersed in it, then that's the only thing you can do to understand. So it's a survival thing at that point.
Yeah. And everything's novel, right? To the point of that reptilian brain. Everything you're hearing is novel and just you're firing on 1,000%.
Yeah, absolutely. So
wow.
Yeah, I love languages, but it's going to take me going to Africa again to actually speak.
You're gonna have all your Duolingo prepared.
Sentences. I have some vocabulary. I can say certain words.
You got the Duolingo foundation so that you get there. Then finally it will click when you're there. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
all this about the cognition and the learning theory though, and why we process information. I think I see at least an immediate connection to the point of like the novelty and those connection points that like we're going to have our students in our classrooms. Fact, they're going to be in front of us or on our online classrooms. There's an opportunity to reach them with novel information, not only through our content, which we're hoping they are interested in, but through a culturally responsive method where we're bringing in cultural references, we're allowing more information, more room for their cultures to be represented, asking them to provide their insights, their worldviews. Like, not only do we get to teach them about tanks and they get to go through Tanks 101 and become experts in tanks, but they'll also be culturally sensitive to their peers, to you, and all the way across, building those bridges, at an emotional level. But I think it's this thing of it's making the space to learn. by
Mm-hmm.
doing all that, they have the space to learn, and then it's easier, if you will, to even get into the content, because tanks, it's really a really easy
Oh,
one
it's
for everybody to
everybody's
get
favorite course,
handle.
you know. When everybody's like, "What do I
Favorite.
take?" It's clearly Tanks 101. No, I would agree, and I think I'm thinking of this too, Robin. And it is, I think a little bit of this too is helping the students anchor to what we're teaching in a lot of
Mhm.
different things, right? Where like if culture, it's yes, we want our students to feel welcomed and a part of this, but it's also a part of like, as we find ways to connect different cultures into what we're doing, that connects with the student at a deeper level to also help, as we know, anchor what they're learning into things that are already a part of their experience and what they're looking at. I mean, I haven't dug deep into the brain science, but I'm sure there's wrinkles involved somewhere of like the fact that like we
For sure.
know that like using previous experience can help anchor new ideas with that previous experience, and makes it much easier for students to either recall or then also think about it at a more complex level, because they're connecting it with previous references or experiences. So that whole dynamic, I think, is what kind of helps pull that together.
Well, and Josh, one
Yeah,
of those
absolutely.
anchors for me, actually, in my teaching experience, is a class we did on this, right? We were talking about what does it take to be sensitive to your learners in the classroom, and as an ESL teacher, they don't necessarily understand you as well. You may not understand them as well. There's going to be miscommunications. You're trying to do something. There may be a task involved that's more difficult. So my teacher that day was actually brewing Vietnamese coffee for us, right? And the experience was to enjoy it and have that as a part of the culture. She had been a teacher in Vietnam. And so we're learning about the coffee and the process of it and why it's culturally relevant. And you want to know why that lesson sticks in my head? She taught it in Vietnamese. And we had to be the dumb, kids. They're like, I don't know. I don't understand you. We wrestled with the entire lesson because she was speaking Vietnamese and we did
Wow.
not speak Vietnamese. That lesson, every part of it sits with me because of that anchor point. That really challenging but novel experience of having her be the language teacher and us be the people on the outside. But I can
Absolutely.
remember everything about the Vietnamese coffee, the culture, all that other stuff, because it was all in Vietnamese. It
Yep.
was
So
really
teach your
frustrating.
classes in Vietnamese. That's what I'm hearing. That's
the lesson.
So
the takeaway.
this is so funny. That ESL class for all of our levels of educators that I was teaching last semester. So I had they're education students, and I teach other education courses. So I had most of them before, especially the early level ones, because I taught early childhood. But the first words that I spoke in that class on purpose, and on purpose, I'm not greeting them as I was greeting them by like waving and smiling and hi, that, but it wasn't like, oh hey, I remember you from the. But the first words that I spoke to the whole class was a good minute and a half of Swahili, and they were lost. Like one student, I think, had been to Uganda and in that class, and I'm glad I'm kind of learning a language that's not widely spoken in America, because that was the effect I was going for, because it's an ESL class, and I opened the class speaking only Swahili, and they were like, huh? And I was like, and I was asking questions of them, expecting an answer, like gesturing that I want an answer, and they're like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden I was like, and now you know how it feels to be an ESL student. And then they're like, oh, Mrs. Shivers, you're so funny. They probably hated me for it. No, they didn't. But that's funny. Like, I can't teach a whole class in Swahili, but I can do maybe a minute and a half if I have it written down.
There's your goal. After you come back, you come back and teach your class.
Yeah, right. I have this little paragraph written down in Swahili that I can read for that class, for that specific thing. But no, it's truly, I mean, when you think about it, the deep level of culture that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation is what drives your worldview and how you see things and how you process things. So, your culture, your cultural background helps you process all of your learning. So it's really important that we don't downplay that aspect of students and that safety that they could have when we celebrate that kind of positive relationship with the students.
Well said.
For sure.
Well said. So I can only count to 10 in Japanese, so that is how I'm going to start all of my classes from now on.
Nice. You should.
I'm just joking. But there's a lot to unpack here. We could probably do a lot more. I'm thinking, maybe another Robin S. Jeffers series on culturally responsive teaching. But we do have to switch into, I think, the thing the Hitech Podcast always talks about. And I know, Robin, the joke always around the office when you're going to be on the podcast is like, I can tell you're like trying to think of an app that Will and I have not talked about yet. That's like the game that Robin is trying to play. So I know you've come prepared. What with your app? What app do you want to share with the listeners this week? Okay.
Well, it's a perfect marriage to the conversation. The app is called Tarjimly. Tarjimly. And it literally means translate for me. So it goes, so like Google Translate can be rubbish. Like all of the things that when you put in text and it spits back text, they're not great, I don't think, in my experience anyway. But Tarjimly is an app it was designed for refugees and for humanitarian efforts. And so it's a pool of volunteers from all over the world. And what you do is you log into the app and you say what language you want to translate to and from. So like my Tarjimly app is permanently set to Sudanese Arabic at the moment because I use this app all the time. I used it earlier today, actually. And what you do is log in, you put your languages that you want to translate to or from, and then it searches all around the world for an available translator, like a real person. And then when you finally get connected to the real person, you can either call, text, or both to them. And then they become a third-party translator for whoever you need to speak to. Now, in an English situation, like teaching English situation, you want to use English as much as you can. I get that. However, in like a humanitarian or volunteer situation, or even just getting to know students, if it's not like a lesson in English and you want to communicate something, that can be a really good thing to use so that you're both understood. Because it's like a three-way conversation then, because like you tell the translator what you would like to say, and then they speak it to the person who you're trying to talk to. So it's a three-way conversation between your phone and the two people actually physically together. I have used this a lot because I've been helping a refugee family that has just come to our city. And our city, fun fact, is known as a certified welcome city. So we have lots and lots of refugees around us. And so I and a team of people have been welcoming this family, and they've had a rough road. And they speak a dialect of Arabic that happens to be very not well known. So lucky us. But no, I mean, it has been, because we've learned a lot from them and they've learned a lot from us. But I've used this app so much. And it's free for the user because the volunteers that are doing the speaking they're volunteers. And it's 24 hours. Like you can just log into this app any time of day and get a real person. Yeah, I use the texting one a lot. Like if I want to send a message to the family, I'll use the texting one. That's what I did today. But if I'm like, they were having a new baby in August, and I had to explain their journey to the hospital and like packing a mother's bag and like what was going to happen in an American hospital. This was their first baby. They have 9 they have 9 children now, but this is the first one born in America, and so this is going to be a lot different from the refugee camp where they had been living. So I was trying to explain this, and the translator on the other end was actually like, wait, what are they doing? I was like, yeah. She's like,
Yep.
oh, bless your hearts. So
Wow.
I if it's really important and it's really like involved, I'll use the speaking.
Yeah.
Like I'll ask if I can call
Right.
them. But if it's just a message that I need to send, I often use the texting one. But it's just a really great app, and it's designed for humanitarian efforts and connecting people together.
It's
I can
very
see
quick
Will's
to
like
get.
visually excited about this.
I downloaded the app. I'm on their website. I'm looking at it.
He's like,
I
he's so pumped.
love
I can
stuff
tell
like
already.
this.
Yeah.
You know us better than we know ourselves sometimes, Robin. Free is our aesthetic, right? Like we love to put tools out there that are going to be useful. But I'm oh, there's a soapbox there. There are too few resources in some of our schools, right? Some of our schools have students who cannot get help
Yeah.
because no one can speak their language. And I'm just thinking of that right now, a teacher who could reach a student because of this, a nurse's aide, a school counselor, heck, the janitor, whoever it is, right? Like there are
Yep.
people who, if a school was equipped with a platform like this, could actually serve their student body significantly. Like I'm Robin, not to distract from and delay or whatever the value of what you're doing. That's fantastic to reach refugees as well. I think that from the humanitarian standpoint, this is just one more way we can be culturally responsive to everyone
Absolutely.
around us.
Yeah.
Whether they're
I made sure my
students,
ESL students knew this.
Yeah, this is just awesome.
It really, and
Gosh.
the translators themselves have always they're just so kind and nice and like helpful. And I mean, they're volunteers and they want to help, and they are humanitarians, and like they're on there because of that. So of course they're going to be kind and helpful. But yeah, no, it's just been really great to use that, and it's been really great to connect with the family that I'm specifically helping. I mean, I haven't used it in a school setting yet. I don't, but yeah.
You've done it again. You did find a tool I had never heard of. So big
well,
win.
I was searching my head for them, and I was like, for these tools, and I was like, did they talk about this? Because I was gonna say Duolingo, but I know you've talked about it before because I've listened to you once or twice.
Every day that passes, you lose an app. So it's it's.
I know, it's getting harder and harder. But then it just clicked in my head. I was like, what are you even thinking? You're going to talk about Tarjimly because that fits with everything you're about. I was like, okay, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, jam-packed. We've gotten all this cognitive stuff in here, the culture responsive stuff.
Pirates.
Blackbeard. Pirates. Yeah.
I don't know where that came from.
Serving those who
I think you beat Justin in the amount of ground that's been covered in an episode. He might have we gotta carefully evaluate, but I think you might have taken Justin down a peg.
Oh, but I didn't bring up genius. Oh wait, I just did.
Thank you as always, Robin. Yeah. We're gonna wrap here in just a second, but we know we'll have you back soon enough.
Whoa, boy. Okay, so that was an episode.
Awesome.
We covered a lot of space in that episode.
Tanks, pirates, brains.
Yeah, everything that anybody could ever want. I feel like we're the podcast of many topics, really. And if you are still listening, Justin, I meant it. She dethroned you on Topic Run. So if you're ever on the podcast again, because we got
to give him.
If I'm just trying, I like to give him. I like to give him little call outs. Every once in a while, see if he's paying attention. See what happens. No, that was great. And overall, like Will and I were talking, we don't really need to give you guys a huge summary because obviously there's so much we talked about with Robin. And there's a lot here. I just want to say thanks again, Robin, for joining us. And again, culturally responsive teaching. I think it comes down to not just trying to just plug stuff in from the cultures from our students, but finding a way to engage with our students carefully and intentionally from where they're coming from in an effort to broaden everybody's experiences in the course, in our classes, and foster better learning. So Will and I don't have much more to say other than to say, do it. That's it. Okay. If you're listening, try it. Do it. There we go. Sold.
Love it.
Done. Nailed it. Okay. Next on the Hitech Podcast, we are going to be talking about the other CRT. No, I'm just joking. I feel like I had to throw it in. You know, we've been making jokes about it. I feel like one last one. I found it in. No. Next episode, on episode 140 of the Hitech Podcast, we've got another guest. I know, surprise. Dave Radpravar is going to be joining us from the Reflection app. There we go. Sorry, my notes weren't up. Dave, I swear, we've just interviewed a lot of people, and I've been confused about things. I almost confused myself. No, this episode is actually super awesome. Reflection app is an app that Will and I talked about way back in the beginning of the days of the Hitech Podcast. It was episode 53. Yep. See, I remembered. It's all coming back to me now. The episode 53, we talked about Reflection app. Since then, Will has actually used this app religiously. Like, he loves this app. And so we're super excited about this. This has been something we've been working on trying to get together for quite a while. So Dave joined us, and a lot of really cool conversation about how Reflection connects into education, and just some cool stuff that they're doing in their app that you guys can check out. So that is coming up next week on episode 140. Dave is going to be talking to us about Reflection and everything that their app can do. And fun little spoiler alert, Will learns about a new feature that's been on the front of the app since the day he's been using it, and he didn't know it was there. So if you don't want to miss that,
tune in to find out what it is.
Week. Yeah, tune in to find out next week. As a reminder, you can find us anywhere on the interwebs, Twitter or YouTube. You can find us out. I know everybody calls it X still, until Twitter no longer has to say I'm X, formerly Twitter. I'm not going to call it X. Okay, so Twitter and YouTube, you can find us at Hitech Podcast. You can also email us if you want to be on the podcast, you want to talk to us, you want to share your thoughts, whatever. You want to send a GIF. I don't know. We used to do animal photos. If you still want to do that, you can, whatever you want to do. I haven't brought that back for a while. You can email us at inbox@hitechpod.us. And also remember to check out our website, hitechpod.us. We put up a lot of cool information about each app and person we talk to and look at on the podcast up on that website. And I just, want to say, keep your eye out. There's some exciting stuff coming for the Hitech Podcast in the year 2024. So you'll want to keep up on that website and some things. There's some new stuff we're planning. I'm not telling you what it is yet. I can tell you it's not a university on tanks, but I know y'all want it.
We're working on it. We're just trying to shake the right hands.
That's 2025. We got to build the tank first, then we can do the class on it. No.
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, they will. Again, thank you for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to harness technology in the classroom, whether online or in person or in a different culture. See ya.
See ya.